Today we're going to talk about the top 30 mistakes watercolour beginners make. So who am I and why do I know what mistakes watercolour beginners make? My name is Michele and I've been teaching painting and drawing for over 20 years here in the UK, and my specialist subject is watercolours. If watercolour painting, drawing and mixed media is something that interests you, don't forget to subscribe. This channel is fully CAT approved. Now, the purpose of this video is not to make you feel bad, it's to make you say, well, everybody makes these mistakes, so I'm doing just fine. We're going to go through these really quickly. They're not in any particular order except for the very last one, which is the most common mistake that watercolour beginners make. So make sure you watch until the end to see that one. I think it will surprise you. Many of these mistakes I've made other videos about, so if you want more information about how to fix these mistakes, you'll find those in the video description. And if there's one particular mistake I haven't made a video on yet, do feel free to ask for that. Absolution will be granted in the comments, so make sure you confess all your sins. And let's get started. So the first mistake is not working light to dark. This often comes from a lack of confidence in colour mixing. It can be really tempting just to go in with those bright, strong colours because it's kind of easy to see what they are rather than mixing something that's a bit neutral and you're not sure how to get that colour. But watercolour is transparent. You need to put the darks in last. At number 2, we have using cheap materials. Now, it's very tempting to think, well, I'm just a beginner, I'm going to make lots of mistakes, and that's true. And so I'll get the cheapest materials that there are, but the problem is that if they're too cheap, then they really are going to affect your progress. The type of paper, paints and brushes you choose really does make a difference. That doesn't mean you need the most expensive ones either, because that again can be daunting and it can cost you a lot of money. What you're looking for is a well-known brand, a trusted brand, and perhaps a student's range to start with. At number 3, we have not stretching your paper. Oh my goodness, the pearl clutching and the nonsense that's taught online about paper stretching and how time consuming it is and how fiddly and how not necessary. When I learned to paint, I was lucky enough to be taught by a botanical artist. It was just the first thing I learned, stretch your paper. It's so easy. I have a video all about how to do it. I've been stretching my own paper here. You can see some of the boards up drying out of the way of the cat. Once you learn to stretch paper, you'll never go back. It's simply the best and easiest surface to work on. At number 4, we have not starting landscapes with the sky. Now, this isn't an exact rule because you get all sorts of different types of landscapes, but 9.999 times out of 10, it's always best to put your sky in first and to make sure you're happy with it before you move on. You can't fix a sky after you've put 100 little tree branches across the top of it, so always do your sky first. At number 5, we have painting next to reds and purples so they bleed. One thing I've found over the years is that any colour that's got red in it bleeds really easily when you paint next to it. So you want to, if possible, put strong reds and purples in last. If that's not possible, you at least want to place them in a way that you don't have to paint next to them later on. Mistake number 6 is looking for an easy subject. The rush at the beginning of my classes when everybody was sorting through the photos. Is this one easy? Is this one easy? Michele, do you think this one's easy? And saying to the person next to them, well, there's not much perspective on this. I think this will be easy. The truth is that nothing is easy. You should paint the things that you love and deal with the problems as you come across them. At number 7, we have taking a wet brush back into a damp area. This is basic physics. Wet paint wants to spread into damp paint. And so many times I see students mess up something that might not have been perfect, but was pretty good by taking a wet brush back into an area that is drying. It's always going to end in disaster. Instead, what you should do is allow that area to fully dry and put another coat on top. 9 times out of 10, that will smooth out any errors that you made in the first layer of paint. At number 8, we have not putting enough paint out. So are you that person, there was always one in my class, that uses tube paints and puts the tiniest little smear of paint out? You're never going to get a good result if you don't have enough paint on your brush. Don't be stingy with your paints. If you're so worried about the price of them, it's almost better to use a slightly cheaper paint and paint with abandon than it is to be stingy with your paints. At number 9, we have always pre-wetting an area before you paint. This not only is not necessary, but it will water down your colours, and so you'll never get those strong, clear colours that you want. Now, there are specific times when you need to wet an area before you put paint on, usually when you're looking for a soft edge. But you do not have to do this all the time, not even when painting Wet into wet, you could just place two wet colours next to each other on dry paper. Blend them together, you'll preserve that full strength of colour. Never wet your paper first unless you know why you're doing it. At number 10, one mistake that some beginners make is believing that you have to follow step-by-step tutorials in order to learn. Now, this one's a little bit controversial. After all, I make a living making step-by-step tutorials. I've got dozens of online courses. People find them really helpful. I've also got courses that just teach techniques. But the truth is that everybody learns in a different way. Some people love step-by-steps and find them really, really useful. Other people just don't enjoy them. I never did another artist's step-by-step in my life. You may also have that sort of in-between area where you might like to watch a step-by-step but not necessarily follow along. There's no wrong way to learn. Every person learns differently. Step-by-steps are great unless they're not great for you. Mistake number 11 is always starting a painting by putting a wash of colour across the whole board. You may have seen this in certain tutorials on YouTube. It's not always wrong, but you need to preserve white paper. Once you've got some colour on that paper, it's going to affect every other transparent colour that you put on top. Not necessarily positively. We want the white of the paper to shine through our colours. You do not need to start every painting by putting a wash of colour down. At number 12, we have avoiding opaque, semi-opaque or granulating colours. There's a bit of a myth that colours that aren't transparent are the cause of muddy paintings. I've got a whole video about that myth and what actually causes muddy paintings. And it's not using granulating or semi-opaque colours. The truth is that in life there are muted colours, there are granular textured objects. And there are things that look opaque just as there are things that look transparent. You want to choose from the full range of pigments and match the type of paint that you're using to the thing that you're painting. Number 13 is using too much masking fluid. If you haven't come across masking fluid, it's a type of sort of liquid rubber that you place on your paper and it can preserve white areas. I've met many people who say, well, I'm never going near that stuff. It's awful. It tears my paper. The reason is you're using too much. I've done another video all about masking fluid mistakes. I'll link that in the description of this video. But spoiler alert, the number one mistake that people use is just using too much. It can look harsh and unnatural. It's a great tool. I do use masking fluid myself. But if you're sticking too much all over your paper, it's not going to look natural and you are going to end up with torn work. Mistake number 14, we have rescuing your work with pen. You know who you are. Do you always get to the end of your watercolour painting and think, it's just missing something, I'm just going to do a few pen outlines? Now, let's be clear, I love working in pen. I often do pen and wash. I've got pen and wash tutorials on this channel. But there's a difference between choosing to work in pen and trying to rescue a failed watercolour painting. If this is something that often happens to you, you want to get yourself out of the habit of rescuing your work with pen. So why do you always feel like you need to rescue your work with pen? It's quite simple. Your tonal contrast is not good enough. So you have low tonal contrast, so everything looks a bit flat, nothing's showing up properly. So then you want to grab that pen and outline things. Instead, you need to work on getting better tonal contrast. I've got a video in the description of this one that will help you. At number 15, we have darkening your colours with black or Payne's grey. So Payne's grey is a common colour included in sets. It's a great colour. Even black has its place in a limited amount of usefulness within watercolour painting, but you shouldn't be darkening your colours with black pigments. Black is not technically a colour, it's a surface that doesn't reflect any light, so it's going to kill all your colours. I've got a video all about how to darken your paints and get stronger colours more effectively without using black. I'll link that one in the video description. Well, goodness, we're halfway through already. Can I just pop in, please, and ask you if you could like this video? If you're finding this video useful, if you could click that like button, that thumbs up, liking, sharing this video, or subscribing to the channel, or leaving me a nice comment telling me all about which mistakes you're making. Absolution will be granted in the comments. Really helps this channel to grow. I'm so grateful to all of you who watch me here on YouTube. And related to our last one, we have using white to lighten watercolours. So generally speaking, you want to avoid using white paint to lighten your watercolours. You simply need to add more water, and this is going to allow the watercolours to glow. There are certain circumstances when I actually like using white paint, but you shouldn't be using it to block out white highlights, which looks very unnatural, or to lighten your colours. I'll leave a video all about the ways that you can use white paint within watercolour painting and get a beautiful natural result that won't flatten or make your colours opaque. You'll find that video in the description of this one. At number 17 on the mistakes that beginners make is buying huge sets of paints when you first start painting. It can be overwhelming and confusing. You can also end up getting really cheap stuff. Let me tell you, as someone that has her own range of paints and that has also worked with several manufacturers to develop paints, what you're paying for is the pigment. So when you buy these huge sets from these cheap unknown brands, you're not getting pigment, you're getting beautiful packaging. Packaging is cheap. Tubes and lids and pretty colours on the outside and cellophane, those things are all cheap. So if you buy cheap paints, what you're losing out on is pigment. Also, if you've got a set that's got 50 different colours, it's going to dissuade you from mixing your own colours. You won't even know where to start. What you want to look for, because not all sets are bad, what you want to look for is what they call a split primary set. Now, this will contain a warm and cool version of each of your 3 artist primaries, so that's yellow, red and blue. Or you can find a list online and make up your own set by buying individual tubes. Some sets, like the one that I sell, also has a few earths in there to help you mix earth colours, because mixed earth colours are not always so great. But lots of brands, or the main brands from Daniel Smith to Winsor & Newton, will make a split primary set, and that's where you want to start. You can add other colours later on once you've got used to mixing your own. Mistake number 18 is arranging your paints or your swatches by manufacturer or brand and not by colour. So whether you've got pan paints and you've got one of those sets where you can move them around in the box, or you've got tube paints that you're storing, or you've got a folder full of paint swatches, you don't want to swatch or store your paints by manufacturer. And the reason for this is it's just not that useful. If you need to paint a yellow flower and you want to see which yellow is the best one out of all the ones that you own, you need to be able to see your yellow swatches together. If you're looking for a tube of yellow paint, you need to grab the box that has got your yellows in. No matter what manufacturers might tell you, any watercolour brands can be mixed with any others, so store your materials by colour. You'll find it makes choosing and using colours so much easier. At number 19, we have the hastily added background. Oh, the paintings I have seen ruined by ill thought out, last minute added backgrounds. You've done a painting, it's not too bad. Oh, do you think shall I just add a background? Let me tell you, the answer to that question straight away is no, don't do it. You're going to make things worse. Now, backgrounds shouldn't just be something you stick in at the end because you think, it might improve things a bit. Your background should be planned from the beginning. Of course, every painting takes you through a journey and you can adjust your plans as you go along. But 9 times out of 10, if you hadn't thought about a background until you finish your work and then you suddenly think, oh, shall I? Let me answer that for you. No, you shouldn't. At number 20, and I learnt this one myself the hard way, we have not writing the colours down that you're using. It's so easy when you're working on a painting. Perhaps you're painting a tree and you've mixed a blue and a yellow together and made a nice green. You think, I'll remember which blue I used and I'll remember which yellow I used. I'm going to carry on after dinner this evening. I don't need to write anything down. And then, of course, life gets in the way. You're tired, you don't go back to it. The next day you need to take the dog to the vets. Then your sister needs you to look after her kids, and so it goes on. And before you turn around, it's been 7 days or 8 days or 14 days before you touched that painting, and you have no earthly clue what colours you used. Always write down the colours that you're using. Because I stretch my paper, I have that nice useful border of paper on the edge where I can write my colours. But if you don't have that, you can write them at the base of your painting if you're using a sketch pad, on a different piece of paper, on the back, it doesn't matter, but keep a record of the colours that you're using. At number 21, we have trying to paint loose, or any other style really. Now, beginners often get very excited when they see a person's artwork that they love, an artist that they really admire, and I want to paint like them. I'm going to learn to paint loosely. I'm going to learn to paint detailed botanicals. You're getting way ahead of yourself, and you're also assuming that you can just take on someone else's style. And sadly, it's just not true. You have no more control over the style of your work than you have over your own eye colour. Now, you can get coloured contact lenses, but it's never going to quite look like you. And the same goes for your work. As much as you may want to paint loosely, It just may not inherently be you. You may want to paint in a very detailed style and just find that you just can't do it. You're giving yourself an uphill task, so what should you do instead? Instead, you should concentrate on the mechanics of painting. Choose the subjects that you like. Learn to colour mix. Learn about composition. Learn about techniques. Your style will find you. You don't need to try and paint in someone else's style. Now, some people carry this on for years, and yes, you can do it, but your work is just never going to be fully what it could be. I've got a very detailed, stylized look to my work. It's not necessarily what I wanted to paint like when I set out, but I know that if I tried to do loose, splashy paintings, it just would never quite be me. Don't try to copy another artist's style, it will all end in tears. At number 22 of the mistakes that beginners make with watercolours is abandoning your work halfway through. So you get halfway through a painting and you think, oh, this is just awful. I can't even be bothered. It's never going to look any good. I'll just give up. Now, there's a couple of reasons why you shouldn't do that. The first one is that all paintings go through an ugly stage. It's well known among professional artists that there is an ugly stage, and it's particularly important with watercolours to push through that ugly stage, because with watercolours, that's where your midtones are. Painting doesn't come alive until you put your darks in at the end. The other reason that you should finish is there's a certain amount of skill to finishing a painting, the final touches that you put on it. Regardless of whether that painting's going to be any good or not, you can accept that that painting is never going to be any good. Well, fantastic. That frees you up to try some really unusual finishing touches, to experiment a bit, to throw your paint around. You'll never get a really good result with your paintings if you don't push all of them through to the end. And number 23, we have acid green landscapes. Are these your landscapes? This comes obviously from not really understanding colour mixing, but it's also not your fault, because the manufacturers often, if they put a green in your set at all, it will be a phthalo green. Now, phthalo green is a fantastic green for mixing, but it's not very natural alone. It's a very blue green, and so it doesn't look like much of nature. Of course, there might be somewhere in an exotic rainforest or a blue lagoon where you might find a use for phthalo green, and it can be adjusted. I have a really useful video all about how to adjust this green to make it more usable in your palette. But remember that even in the smallest set of paint, you have infinite greens, because you have yellows and you have blues. Even Payne's grey, which has a lot of blue pigment in, and orange, which has a lot of yellow pigment in, can be used to mix greens. So spend some time mixing your greens. I'll leave a video or two in the description of this one that's going to help you to mix better greens. Number 24 is reserving your whites at the start. So the very, very first thing that you should do when you start a watercolor painting is look for any areas that are either very light or pure white. If there are areas that are pure white and need to be left as the white of the paper, you need to reserve those at the start. That doesn't mean you need to cover your work in masking fluid. It may just be as simple as drawing a highlight on a glass bottle so that you know to paint round it. But if you don't reserve your whites at the start, you're going to lose them later on. At number 25, we have the mistake of not letting your work dry. There's always a point in work where you need to let things dry. The only exception to this rule might be a botanical painting where you're literally painting individual flowers all over a large white piece of paper, and you might be able to move from area to area without painting next to things that are wet and getting in a muddy mess. But even then, I would make the argument that you need to take a break sometimes and just assess your work. Professional watercolorists frequently let things dry, let layers dry, not for 5 minutes either. It can be really hard to understand this when you're watching tutorials online, because of course, I'm not going to leave my camera running for the 2.5 hours where I have a cup of tea, eat some lunch and go for a walk before I paint the next bit. I'm just going to cut that in the video edit. But please understand that you should frequently let areas of your work dry, particularly if you don't want things to bleed and run. And also, your paints contain gum arabic, which is a natural adhesive. You need the first layer to adhere to the paper. It's going to help to keep it from moving before you put another layer on top. At number 26, we have shopping for supplies backwards. Now, this doesn't just go for art, this can go for any area of your life. Don't we all do it? Don't we all scroll Instagram and think, oh, I love that dress, I love that eyeliner, look at that cake tin, I need one of those, let me buy that immediately. We're being, of course, won over by advertisers, and the same can happen with art supplies and with sets of paint or pastels or whatever you're looking at. You want to start working with a small amount of supplies and add things in as you need them. Almost all all online art manufacturers or real-life art shops will sell quality items singly. If you want to do a little bit of oil pastel resist, you don't need to buy a full set of oil pastels. You can just buy one or two and see how you get on with them. I never forget the time when I decided overnight I was going to be a pastel artist. I'd seen some really nice pastel work and this is it, this is my future. I'm going to be a pastel artist. I went out and bought a very expensive, very large set of pastels. At least I was able to use them to teach other people. But the truth is, I'm not really a soft pastel artist. Yes, I can use them quite competently. I even teach them sometimes, but they're just not me. They're not my favourite. So don't be swayed by these fancy adverts of sets of this or sets of that or 30 marker pens for this or that. Just start working and then add in the items that you need. It's going to stop your studio from being cluttered. You're going to find you only have things in hand that you need, so it's going to be much easier for you to work and organise your things. The environment will thank you too. Mistake number 27 is not swatching your colours. I've got a tube of blue paint here. There's no way I can tell what colour this is from the tube. I've actually ordered the same set, 2 tubes of the same colour from the same manufacturer, and the colours on the outside have been randomly different. You cannot tell what your paint looks like unless you see it swatched on a piece of paper. At the very least, you should be swatching each of your colours with varying amounts of water from light to dark so you can see how they actually look. You can then take things further if you want to and make mixed colour swatches where you mix your colours together. You should also be swatching as you go along. Never just stick some paint on your painting without knowing what the colour looks like exactly. Instead, swatch it on a little piece of watercolour paper. Allow it to dry for a few minutes because paint lightens as it dries, at least watercolours do. At all times, you should be swatching and getting to know your colours. It's going to tell you so much about whether they granulate, how opaque they are, and what they really, really look like. Mistake number 28 is a bad underdrawing. It doesn't matter how much drawing you need for a subject or how little drawing you need. You need to make sure that drawing is okay and that you are happy with it. If you've ever caught yourself thinking, oh, I'm not sure about this drawing, it'll improve when I put the paint on. Let me disillusion you, it will not improve when you put the paint on. That paint is going to magnify the bad drawing. How many times have I been in a Facebook group and somebody's asked for help with a painting and I've gone to help them and I've looked at it and thought, there's just one thing you can't fix, and that's a bad underdrawing. We all know that with watercolours it's quite hard to get rid of your pencil lines. If something is wrong or it's in the wrong place, fix your drawing before you start painting. Mistake number 29 is only using pan paints. So I didn't say using pan paints. There's nothing wrong with pan paints. They're great for travel and they're just as good quality as the paints that you get in tubes. But you'll find if you look at professional artists, I can only think of one actually who uses pan paints. Very few professional artists use pan paints. And why is this? Professional artists tend to do larger paintings and we tend to want to get a really strong dramatic result. There's absolutely no way you can paint a huge blue sky and get a really good result. You're going to spend ages just scrubbing and scrubbing your little block of blue paint trying to get enough pigment up. So even if you use pan paints, that's absolutely fine. I would add a few tube colours in as well, particularly the blues, because we often need colours for the sky, don't we? And greens as well for a large landscape. Of course, they can be mixed. Whatever your favourite painting subject is, if there's frequently an area where you need a lot of paint, I would add some tube paints. They'll work fine alongside your pans. So here it is, number 30. The biggest mistake that beginners make is expecting to create a complete, perfect painting right from the beginning. I don't know of any other thing that we learn in life where we expect perfection from day one, but I've seen beginners get so upset because perhaps they do a really good sky and then they mess up the foreground, or maybe they paint some roses and then they ruin the leaves or they ruin the background. This is absolutely perfectly normal. It is completely unrealistic to expect to do a full painting that is perfect in every aspect, or even as good as you want it in every aspect right from the beginning. Instead, you need to analyse and improve your work and understand that this is just a stage that you're going through. You won't have consistency when you first start painting, so even when you do get things right, you'll ruin the painting in other areas. But it doesn't matter, it's all a learning process. What I want you to do instead of giving yourself this expectation of producing a full, perfect, finished painting is to learn something called deliberate practice, which helps you to analyse and improve your work, so that you're getting a constant improvement and will eventually get that beautiful finished painting that you're looking for. I've got a video in the description of this one that's going to help you to do just that. So do let me know in the comments which of these mistakes you have made. Sometimes when I say that, people comment all of them, but hopefully not all of them. But even if it is all of them, hopefully I've given you some guidance today and helped you to understand that these are just common mistakes that all beginners make. Now, before you leave this video, don't forget to pop into that video description. Not only can you find all of the other videos that I've offered you here to help you with your painting journey, but you'll find lots of free stuff down there for you. There's some free downloadable PDFs, even a free course that you can take. And if you're watching this video when it's just gone up, I've just launched my watercolor flower painting course, and there's a big discount on that one. Now, fixing all of the watercolor mistakes in the world are not going to help you if your drawing is poor. So I have a really good video that's going to give you some quick wins with your drawing. You can watch that video right now.